Well, I haven't been able to speak for the last 2 years, obviously with the criminal trial and then the civil case underway. So much has been said about this political hit job on myself and the government. I think it's important for me to tell my story. At the time, there was never an allegation of rape by Ms Higgins. However, through my discussions with my chief of staff and then subsequently with me, we could see she was distressed, which is why that first time I met with her, I suggested she talk to the AFP because they were in the building and they were better placed to have sensitive discussions. So despite the fact that she never, ever said to me she thought she'd been raped, clearly at some point it became clear she thought there'd been some sort of sexual activity. And as her boss, I was not well equipped to have that discussion with her. The attack by Labor on me in the Senate, their behaviour would be illegal in any other workplace in this country. I was accused of covering up a rape day after day after day after day. They were asking me questions that legally and ethically I knew I couldn't and I shouldn't answer. Ms Higgins had said she was going to make a fresh complaint to the AFP, and that is where it should always have been. Her allegation of rape should never, never have been politicised and turned into a political weapon, which is what it was. It's not right. It's just not right. And every Australian should really think about the issue. What do they want from their politicians? You know, Labor were acting in a way that would be illegal in any other workplace in this country. And as those who set the laws for other Australians, we must be held to account to the same standards, and we're not. Having supported friends and family who have been raped, I was very, very well aware that agency is critical. And having a victim or an alleged victim to determine their own future, to determine who they tell, to determine what course of action they take, and then to support their decision is critically important. As I said many, many times in the Senate, I respected her agency and it was her story to tell, and she was. Now, just because it didn't match with my recollection of events and my story, it doesn't invalidate her right and to tell her story, which she has. So at the time, my chief of staff and I first became aware that there had been a serious security breach by 2 staff after hours into my ministerial office, which I have never heard of happening before in all my years working in the building. So it was a serious security breach. And that is how it was reported to us, and that is how we dealt with it. I wasn't there for most of it, but my chief of staff did with both staff members. But it became clear that, to me, and to my chief of staff, that Brittany was concerned about 2 things. One, about losing her job, but also that she had drunk too much, she couldn't remember. But towards the end of the week with the discussions, my understanding is the discussions with Fiona, she was starting to, I think, have concerns that maybe she'd had sex. When I talked to her the following Monday at the first meeting, there was never any suggestion, and there was no allegation that a sexual assault had occurred in my office. But when I talked to her, she was distressed, I think, about both things. And I did what I thought was right in suggesting to her that we had AFP in the building, they had access to the right counsellors and the right advice, and I clearly wasn't the right person to counsel her on that. But before that, Fiona demonstrably, and according to our HR department, which is the Department of Finance, confirmed in writing that we had actually done everything in the circumstances that we could have and we should have. Now, when I saw the interview with Lisa Wilkinson and I heard what happened 2 years ago, I was upset, I was mortified, but mostly I felt terribly sorry for Brittany Higgins, because I looked at it and thought, who on earth would put a clearly distressed young woman on national TV talking about an issue before she'd re-raised it with the police. This should always have been a matter for the police and then the justice system. But it became everything. But as Brittany Higgins has said, it wasn't so much, it became not about her, but about journalists jockeying for awards and other things. So there was never, ever any suggestion that her job was at risk, which is why I suggested to her that she'd have her support if she went to the AFP, which she did. So there was never, ever, ever any suggestion from me she would lose her job. In fact, quite the contrary. After the election, when we returned back from Perth, I offered her a job in my ministerial office. She declined. She thanked me for being a great boss. She gave me flowers. And then she went to Michaela Cash's office, I understand, on promotion. 2 years on, my major reflection is a question I think for all Australians, is what do you expect from your federal members of parliament? This was clearly a hit job designed to hurt Scott Morrison and the government, and by taking down the Defence Minister. But what happened to me in the Senate by my Labor colleagues would not be legal in any other workplace. And the real question is should they have used Brittany Higgins' story, and I think abused her agency, to make a political hit job on the government? And should they actually do that to a fellow senator? Because what they did would never, ever be legal or allowed in any other workplace. The entire nation could see the impact of what they were doing in the Senate on me, to the point where I broke. Everybody has a breaking point, and they deliberately found my breaking point. And you would not be able to do that in any other workplace in this country. And that is the real question for Australians. Should we be held to account for the same behaviour as we make laws to hold everybody else to account? Allegations of rape should only ever be the jurisdiction of of law enforcement, but also the courts. And someone's agency must always be respected. There are no winners in this. In this particular incident, there are no winners. I'm a woman who has spent my life serving my nation in the Parliament and in the Army, but I was expendable. My Chief of Staff, who is one of the most wonderful women I know, and who was, again, she was expendable. We were both expendable for the cause.